ईरान सामान्य देश जैसा नहीं चलता। ये एक व्यवस्था की तरह संचालित होता है, एक ऐसी व्यवस्था जो अपनी सीमाओं से कहीं आगे तक फैली है। मिलिशिया के जरिए, गठबंधनों के जरिए, 4 दशकों में बनी प्रभावशाली ताकत के जरिए। और इस व्यवस्था की एक खास बात है, यह स्थिर केंद्र पर टिकी हुई है। आज वही केंद्र भारी दबाव में है, यह आग की चपेट में है। जब ऐसी व्यवस्था टूटने लगती है तो सारा संसार यही सवाल पूछ रहा है। ज्यादातर लोग ईरान के बारे में यह नहीं समझते कि यह सिर्फ सेना और विचारधारा वाला देश नहीं, यह एक केंद्र है, सबसे परिष्कृत राज्य समर्थित मिलिशिया नेटवर्क का केंद्र। तेहरान ने 40 साल से ज्यादा समय लगाकर इसे बनाया। एक मिलिशिया, एक हथियार पाइपलाइन, एक विचारधारा के निर्यात से इसकी बनावट ऐसी है कि ईरान में जो होता है वह ईरान तक सीमित नहीं रहता। बिल्कुल नहीं। आज हम इसी नेटवर्क को तोड़कर समझेंगे कि यह कैसे बना, क्यों टूट रहा है और इसके केंद्र के गिरने का पूरे मध्य पूर्व पर क्या असर पड़ेगा। जवाब उतना आसान नहीं है जितना लगता है। शुरू करते हैं, ईरान ने वास्तव में क्या बनाया। ज्यादातर समाचार इसे नजरअंदाज करते हैं। जब 1969 में इस्लामी गणराज्य की नींव पड़ी तो उसने अपने संविधान में एक मिशन लिख दिया। दस्तावेज साफ कहता है कि क्रांति जारी रहेगी और हम सीधे उद्धृत करते हैं, देश के अंदर और बाहर दोनों जगह। यह सिर्फ कविता नहीं थी, यह रणनीतिक खाका था, क्रांति निर्यात करने का आदेश। अगले 4 दशकों में यह आदेश आधुनिक इतिहास की सबसे महत्वपूर्ण भू राजनीतिक संरचना में बदल गया। इस संरचना का औजार था इस्लामिक रिवॉल्यूशनरी गार्ड कॉर्प्स यानी IRGC और खासकर उसकी विदेशी शाखा कुद्स फोर्स। कुद्स फोर्स को सामान्य सेना मत समझिए, इसे प्रभाव बनाने वाली निर्माण कंपनी समझिए। इसका काम ईरान की जमीन बचाना नहीं, बल्कि हर जगह ईरान की पहुंच बढ़ाना था, साझेदार बनाना, प्रतिनिधि हथियार बंद करना, राजनीतिक आंदोलनों को फंड देना, क्रांतिकारी विचारधारा को ठोस रसद में बदलना। इसने ऐसा बजट, धैर्य और रणनीतिक सूझबूझ से काम किया कि पश्चिमी खुफिया एजेंसियां सालों तक इसे कम आंकती रहीं। कुद्स फोर्स कमांडर कासिम सुलेमानी के नेतृत्व में, जिन्हें जनवरी 2020 में अमेरिका ने मार गिराया, यह अभियान चरम पर पहुंचा। सुलेमानी ईरान की बाहरी रणनीति के जीवंत प्रतीक बन गए। वे बेरूत से बगदाद और सना तक मिलिशिया कमांडरों के साथ रिश्ते संभालते थे। उनकी मौत के बाद ईरान ने सिर्फ एक जनरल नहीं, अपने बाहरी साम्राज्य का मुख्य वास्तुकार खो दिया। 2026 तक ईरान ने जिस गठबंधन को खड़ा किया उसे विश्लेषक प्रतिरोध की धुरी कहते हैं। भूमध्य सागर से लाल सागर और उससे आगे तक फैले सशस्त्र समूहों का अनौपचारिक गठबंधन, लेबनान में हिजबुल्लाह, गाजा में हमास, इराक में ईरान समर्थित मिलिशिया, पॉपुलर मोबिलाइजेशन फोर्सेस के तहत कई राज्य संस्थाओं और बजट में सीधे शामिल, यमन में हूती आंदोलन और सीरिया में हाल तक एक महत्वपूर्ण भूमि गलियारा जो तेहरान को बेरूत से जोड़ता था और पूरे नेटवर्क की हथियार सप्लाई की रीढ़ था। हिजबुल्लाह को प्रोटोटाइप मानिए। 1982 में जब इजराइल ने लेबनान पर हमला किया तो ईरान के IRGC ने मौका देखा। उन्होंने लड़ाकों को प्रशिक्षित किया, ढांचा खड़ा किया, वित्तीय चैनल बनाए और दुनिया की सबसे सक्षम गैर राज्य सशस्त्र संगठन तैयार की। सिर्फ मिलिशिया नहीं, राजनीतिक पार्टी, सामाजिक सेवा प्रदाता, एक राज्य के अंदर राज्य जो अंततः तेहरान को जवाब देता था। 2006 के UN सुरक्षा परिषद प्रस्ताव 1701 ने लेबनान के सभी सशस्त्र समूहों के पूर्ण निरस्त्रीकरण की मांग की। 2 दशक बाद भी वह निरस्त्रीकरण नहीं हुआ। यही ईरान द्वारा बनाई गई संरचनाओं का पैमाना है, जो UN प्रस्तावों को अवशोषित कर भी काम करती रहीं। फिर इराक में 2003 के अमेरिकी हमले ने ईरान को असाधारण उपहार दिया। सद्दाम हुसैन, तेहरान का सबसे खतरनाक क्षेत्रीय दुश्मन, सत्ता से हटाया गया और राजनीतिक सुरक्षा का खालीपन पैदा हुआ, जिसे भरने के लिए ईरान सबसे तैयार था। Together, this system allowed Iran to do something no conventional military spending could buy. It gave Tehran the ability to threaten adversaries, project power, and shape regional politics across 7 countries simultaneously without putting a single Iranian soldier openly on the front line. The threat was everywhere. The fingerprints were deniable. The cost was remarkably low compared to a conventional army. But here's the thing about a system built on a hub. It only works as long as one thing holds. To understand just how powerful this network became at its peak, you have to look at the numbers. From November 2023 to October 2024 alone, the Houthis in Yemen carried out nearly 190 attacks on commercial and naval ships in the Red Sea, paralyzing one of the world's most critical trade corridors, forcing global insurers to reclassify the entire region as a war zone. Hezbollah, sitting just across Israel's northern border, had amassed an arsenal estimated at around 150,000 rockets before the conflict with Israel intensified significantly. Iraqi militias struck American targets repeatedly, maintaining a constant pressure campaign that tied down U.S. resources across the region. And Iran's annual financial support to Hezbollah alone was estimated by the Foundation for Defense of Democracies at $700 million a year. $700 million annually to one group in one country. This was Iran's forward defense doctrine made real. The theory was elegant in its ruthlessness. Fight your wars abroad through partners so conflict never reaches Iranian soil. Keep the pressure on your enemies from all directions simultaneously. Make yourself so expensive to attack that no one dares. Iran had built what its own strategists called strategic depth, a human shield made of ideologically aligned militias spread across the entire region. The Islamic Republic could sit back and threaten the world through other people's hands. That strategy worked. For decades, it worked brilliantly, until it didn't. Because the cracks in this system didn't appear on February 28, 2026, they'd been building for years. The October 7th attack in 2023 triggered a catastrophic Israeli response that devastated Hamas, killing its leadership one by one, destroying its military infrastructure, leaving it unable to serve as a serious partner in any regional conflict. Then came the Hezbollah war. Israeli strikes in 2024 assassinated much of Hezbollah's senior leadership and hammered its military capacity, leaving the group diminished and its fighters going to ground. The Syria corridor, that crucial weapons pipeline, collapsed completely in December 2024 when the Assad regime fell, severing Hezbollah's main resupply route and the geographic space where IRGC officers had historically met with proxy commanders in person. In 2025, a joint U.S.-Israeli campaign further degraded Iran's defenses and nuclear program in 12 days of direct strikes. Meanwhile, inside Iran itself, the pressure was building in a completely different direction. Sanctions had hollowed out the economy for years. The rial had lost the vast majority of its value against the dollar over the previous decade. Inflation was running at brutal levels, and ordinary Iranians were watching their purchasing power evaporate while the government poured resources into foreign militias and nuclear ambitions. Infrastructure was crumbling. Hospitals were underfunded. The gap between the regime's revolutionary rhetoric and the lived reality of its citizens had never been wider. In early 2026, extensive protests swept the country, put down by force, but a clear signal of just how thin the regime's domestic legitimacy had become. By the time February arrived, analysts were describing the Islamic Republic as sitting at its weakest point in years. The forward defense doctrine, the whole idea of keeping the fight far from home, was under maximum strain. And then the war came home anyway. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched what became known as Operation Epic Fury and Operation Roaring Lion, a series of coordinated strikes against Iran. The stated objectives included targeting Iran's nuclear program, its ballistic missile infrastructure, and inducing regime change. And in the opening hours of that campaign, something happened that no one had publicly predicted, though many had privately feared. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei was killed. The man who had led the Islamic Republic since 1989, the theological and political anchor of the entire system, was dead before the first day was over. And the decapitation didn't stop there. Within days and weeks, Iran's defense minister Aziz Nasirzadeh was killed. IRGC commander Mohammad Pakpour was killed. Intelligence chief Esmail Khatib was killed. On March 17th, Ali Larijani, Secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, was assassinated. By mid-March, the Israeli military estimated that between 3,000 and 4,000 Iranian soldiers and commanders had been killed. The Henga Organization for Human Rights put the military death toll at over 6,500 by March 24th. Iran fought back hard. It fired over 500 ballistic missiles and nearly 2,000 drones at Israel and American bases across the region. Missiles struck Tel Aviv. Iranian attacks hit targets across the Gulf, Kuwait's main oil refinery, Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, Bahrain's capital, Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. The Strait of Hormuz was threatened. Oil prices surged. The Iranian Red Crescent reported over 80,000 civilian building units damaged or destroyed inside Iran. This was a country being dismantled in real time. If you're finding this breakdown valuable, this is exactly the kind of geopolitical analysis we do here at Fall of Nations. And we're just getting to the part that changes everything. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Here's what nobody was ready for. The proxy network, the entire edifice Iran spent more than 40 years constructing, began to fragment almost immediately, and not in the way you'd expect. Not in a coordinated final stand, but in something far more disturbing. Each piece of the network started acting on its own logic, no longer coordinated from Tehran, no longer receiving strategic direction from a functioning center. Look at what happened in just the first 3 weeks of the conflict. Iraqi militias struck American bases 21 times in a single day, with no discernible order from Tehran, acting autonomously, acting on local rage, local politics, local commanders who suddenly had no one above them to answer to. Meanwhile, Hamas, one of Iran's key partners, issued a public statement urging Iran to stop bombing Gulf states because millions of Palestinian workers lived there. That statement would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier, and the Houthis, the group that had been terrorizing Red Sea shipping on Iran's behalf for 2 years, went conspicuously quiet. No major attacks since the war began, watching, waiting, making their own calculations about what survival looks like without a patron. And Hezbollah, the so-called crown jewel of the entire network, found itself fighting an Israeli ground invasion in southern Lebanon with a leadership already decimated by assassination and a weapons pipeline that had been severed with the collapse of the Syria corridor. Lebanon's own government declared the action unlawful and called on the group to disarm. Then Lebanon declared the Iranian ambassador persona non grata and ordered him to leave the country. The hub was gone, and the spokes were spinning off in different directions. The financial pipeline that sustained all of this is now in pieces. Iranian banking infrastructure destroyed. IRGC financial operatives isolated or dead. The personal relationships through which proxy management functioned, the secure back-channel calls, the in-person meetings in Damascus, severed. What took more than 40 years to build is being stress-tested in ways it was never designed to survive. But here is where it gets more complicated. Because the fall of the center doesn't mean every piece of the network simply disappears. And this is the part that matters most for understanding what actually comes next. Each group in the axis is different, and those differences now define their fate. Hezbollah has been deeply embedded in Lebanese political life for decades, providing social services, running in elections, holding government ministries, commanding local loyalty in Shia communities. Even without Iranian resupply, it doesn't simply vanish. What's more likely is that it contracts, fragments internally, and fights for local survival rather than regional power projection. Every rocket it fires in March 2026 is irreplaceable inventory Tehran can no longer replenish. The group may survive as a locally anchored political military actor, smaller, less dangerous beyond Lebanon's borders, but not extinct. The Iraqi militias are a different story. Many of them are already embedded in state institutions, drawing on state budgets, operating with legal status under the Popular Mobilization Forces umbrella. In a scenario where Iranian support dries up entirely, some of these groups are more likely to deepen their capture of Iraqi state resources and local criminal networks, transforming from Iran-backed proxies into autonomous armed institutions that retain their ideological core while finding new revenue sources. That is not necessarily safer. It is just a different kind of threat. The Houthis are perhaps the most structurally resilient of all. They control territory, They tax the population. They have internal coercive capacity that doesn't depend on external orders. The Defense Intelligence Agency documented years of weapons smuggling, interdicting at least 20 Iranian vessels carrying missile components and drones between 2015 and 2024. But a movement that governs territory can survive the loss of an external sponsor, at least as a local power. Its long-range strike capacity degrades without resupply. Its reach contracts. But it does not disappear from Yemen's political map, and Hamas. Hamas is fighting for organizational survival right now, not regional power projection. Iranian support was always an accelerant, not the origin. Palestinian armed mobilization has deeply rooted local logic that predates the Islamic Republic by decades. Cutting the Iranian supply line removes a major channel of finance and weapons. It does not remove the underlying conditions. So here is what the honest, evidence-based version of this story actually looks like. Iran's fracture, if it completes, would deal a devastating blow to the state-backed militant ecosystem. It would degrade supply chains, dissolve command relationships, disrupt financial pipelines, discredit a model, demoralize networks built on the myth of an invincible revolutionary state. Foreign policy argued in mid-2025 that prolonged Iranian weakness could mean the decline of armed Islamism in the Middle East, precisely because Iran had been its key state-level enabler. That analysis has only become more relevant since February 28th. But history gives us a warning we shouldn't ignore. ISIS was declared defeated more than once, and each time the conditions were right, a governance vacuum, a power struggle, a region destabilized by war, it reconstituted. The group lost its caliphate in 2019 and was supposed to be finished. It wasn't. A Boston University analysis argued that war, state collapse, and political breakdown produce exactly the kind of vacuum that Salafi jihadi movements are built to fill. The United Nations has repeatedly described ISIS as a resilient, adaptable, evolving threat whose affiliates remain active across multiple continents and have never truly stopped recruiting. ISIS does not need a state sponsor. It does not need a pipeline from Tehran. It feeds on chaos, on ungoverned space, on communities who feel abandoned and humiliated. And a destabilized post-war Middle East, with collapsing central authority and competing armed factions fighting over the pieces, is exactly the kind of environment in which that kind of movement historically thrives. What this means is brutal in its clarity. The collapse of Iran's system doesn't end militant Islam. It ends this particular version of it, the version underwritten by a state, coordinated by a command structure, funded by a government. And in its place, the danger is a different kind of extremism, decentralized, locally rooted, harder to target, harder to deter. Not a network radiating out from Tehran, but scattered nodes, each one making its own calculations with no one left to call. The Gulf states that Tehran has been striking since February 28th are watching this unfold with profound anxiety. Not just because of the missiles landing near their oil infrastructure right now, but because of what a fractured Iran means on their doorstep for the next decade. A weakened, chaotic Iran is not a quiet Iran. It is a source of unpredictable spillover that threatens economic plans that took a generation to build. The Strait of Hormuz, through which roughly 20% of the world's oil supply passes, has been threatened throughout this conflict. Global markets have lurched on every contradictory diplomatic signal. The world is watching a strategic choke point become a live bargaining chip in a war that hasn't found its ending yet. This is what the fall of a hub looks like in the real world. Not clean, not quiet, not resolved in days or weeks. It is a process, messy, contested, and dangerously unpredictable. The most dangerous moment for a system like this is not when it is strong. It is when it starts losing control, and the network it spent more than 40 years building starts to move on its own. We are watching that moment happen in real time today. The axis of resistance was built to protect the Islamic Republic by fighting its enemies abroad. Right now, it is fighting 5 separate wars in 5 different countries with its central nervous system severed. Some groups are escalating beyond what Tehran would have ordered. Others have refused to fight at all. The 40-year experiment in exporting revolution is being tested by the very war it was designed to prevent. Will the region that emerges from all of this be freer, more stable? Or does the vacuum Iran leaves behind become something none of us expected and none of us are prepared for? That question doesn't have an answer yet, but here at Fall of Nations, we'll be watching every move. What do you think? Does the collapse of Iran's network ultimately weaken radical Islam across the region? Or does it just scatter it into something harder to stop? Drop your take in the comments below, and if you want analysis like this before it makes it into the mainstream news cycle, subscribe to Fall of Nations. We'll see you in the next one.